Hi. So today we'll talk about ADHD and love. And we'll talk about ADHD and love. And in other words, we talk about ADHD and attachment styles. Now, I'm specifically talking today about adult ADHD. If you are the parent of a child interested in ADHD, this video may be interesting to you, but it may not be as targeted as you would want it to be. What I'll be focusing on today is adult ADHD and love and issues in relationships, and most importantly, what to do about them. So, if you're watching this, you probably either in a relationship with someone with ADHD, or it's something you're dealing with yourself. Now, I have a very, very, very positive outlook on ADHD. It's not to say that I don't sometimes struggle myself still, even though I've done lots of healing and I'm a therapist and a hypnotherapist. Um, and I've changed tremendously since I've done the self work. However, there are still things such as focus or forgetfulness that I occasionally do struggle with because although rewiring the brain is possible, it happens all the time, regardless of whether you do the healing work or not. There may still be times, there may still be things that you still need to work on and that are more deeply ingrained than others. And with ADHD, forgetfulness is one of them. Distractibility is another one. But what happens is that you're more easy on yourself as you do the work. So without further ado, let's talk about ADHD and relationships today. So first of all, what is adult ADHD? Well, it comes up in many different forms. It comes up as hyperactivity, comes up as the inattentiveness, not being able to sit still in meetings. In my case, before I was diagnosed and before someone suggested I might have ADHD, my life was just hectic. It was all over the place. There's so many things I have done. And at this point, I wouldn't change a thing in my past. But back then, I really, really struggled. So if you're struggling right now, know that there is hope. And the hope is in the healing part. And we'll talk about that later. So it can also come up in relationships. It can manifest relationship issues. And the reason is that it is so tightly connected to attachment. Now, what is attachment? Attachment, according to attachment theory, is that need of the child to attach to a primary caregiver. And to simplify this for you, if we have a family with parents who are consistently available and they are very much attuned to our needs, then no problem. The child tends to develop, what we call secure attachment style, and usually no ADHD occurs. Now, of course, it's not the only factor for ADHD, but it's very, very, very linked. Now, on the contrary, if the parents are not consistently available, if there's trauma that the child experiences, if the parents are anxious or the primary caregiver is anxious, neglectful, abusive, and so on, then insecure attachment will likely develop according to attachment theory. And ADHD develops, one of the reasons ADHD develops is also that lack of secure development. I mean, it happens, it starts to develop before birth as the brain develops. Research shows that elevated levels of cortisol in the mother during pregnancy are very highly correlated with ADHD, especially in the last months of pregnancy, as the prefrontal cortex develops. In the early years, high levels of stress also tend to be correlated with ADHD. When I work with clients, what happens all the time, what comes up all the time, is that there was an element of confusion, of stress and confusion in the environment. And my clients who come to see me for ADHD symptoms are always, always very, very sensitive individuals. They are extremely sensitive, extremely attuned to what is going on. I actually call it genius ADHD because it's that sensitivity that actually sets the stage for doing miracles, for doing groundbreaking work, and having an amazing life and having a different life. If one works on the downsides that come with it. So it's genius in disguise, and you need to heal that trauma that comes with it in order for that genius and kind of superpower to come in. If you haven't seen my videos on Turn ADHD into a Superpower, then make sure to watch them as well. Now, continuing on attachment styles, attachment theory, and ADHD. So what happens early on very often is that element of confusion, that lack of secure attachment to a primary caregiver. And that doesn't necessarily look like abuse or not even like neglect. It may, or not intentional neglect in any case. It may simply mean that the primary caregiver is not available for all sorts of reasons. It could be that they are ill and they have to be absent. So the child needs to be taken care of by a grandparent or another parent or another caregiver, or not maybe even someone outside of the family. It may happen that the parent is very anxious. In fact, it is very often said, research shows that people with ADHD, parents with ADHD, create children with ADHD and children with attachment issues as well. Why? Because of that inconsistency. When we have ADHD and we're inconsistent before we've done the healing work, and we're inconsistent in our ability to pay attention to anything, we'll probably be inconsistent in our ability to pay attention to a child. And so what happens is then that essentially like creates like. We create children who don't receive that consistent attachment and attunement that they need, and they have a propensity to develop ADHD as well. So if you have ADHD and you are a parent, or you're about to, or you're thinking about being a parent, I highly suggest that you start being aware of your own attachment issues and start working on them right away, so that, you know, for the sake of your children, for the sake of future generations, for the sake of bringing healthy generations into the world. So according to attachment theory, we have two insecure attachment styles that we'll review shortly. But the main thing is that the important thing is that whatever secure attachment style you may have developed, that it's very likely that you have developed an insecure attachment style if you have ADHD, and that creates issues with relationships. The other thing that happens is that because we're so sensitive when we have ADHD, we tend to be also very sensitive to rejection early on. And that lack of proper attunement can be perceived as rejection. Let's give an example. If mom is in the room and she's making dinner, and that baby toddler who is about to develop ADHD, or is developing ADHD already for that matter, needs her attention, and he's vying for her attention, and he wants to be looked at, play with, and mommy just says, not right now, mommy has to make dinner. And you may think, oh, what's wrong with that? She's taking care of him. But that's not how the child perceives it. That child perceives that as a rejection. Mom's not available for me. She's not looking at me right now. She's looking the other way. And that's perceived as rejection. And again, if you're a parent of a child who's developing ADHD, or that, you know, or of an adult child with ADHD, it doesn't mean that this is your fault. Sometimes it happens because we are simply preoccupied. Parents can be preoccupied, anxious, and that can lead to, to creating the environment that's conducive to ADHD. In fact, I have a great book here, which I highly recommend to everyone. It's called The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read, and your children will be glad that you did. It's an amazing book on parenting and essentially on being attuned to a child's needs, because not being attuned to a child's needs is what sets the stage for both ADHD and attachment, insecure attachment, attachment issues. It's not to say that everybody with ADHD has relationship issues, but it's usually the case. Most people with ADHD have some sort of attachment issues and insecurity in relationships, and also rejection sensitivity, coupled with rejection sensitivity. So many of my clients say, oh, I've Googled this and I've Googled that, and I think I have ADHD. I think I also have rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. And I say, well, yes, of course you do, because they go hand in hand. It's not that you have this diagnosis and then this diagnosis, so you're broken not once, but twice, but three times. You're not broken. It's just that you haven't been properly attended to when you were growing up. Now, what often happens is children who are hyperactive, they simply are more difficult to handle. So the parents tend to have difficulties handling or dealing with those children. And think about where ADHD develops again. It develops in the conditions of stress, elevated levels of cortisol, especially in the mother, but also in the family environment after birth. So who's more likely to be stressed out? People who are maybe one extreme, are addiction issues, or alcoholics, or there's abuse in the family, but on the other extreme have the best of intentions but simply have anxiety and their own attachment issues. So you can't really say which starts first, whether it's the parents that have insecure attachment and anxiety and so on, and then pass it on to the children, or the children develop ADHD in an environment of stress, and then that's difficult for the parent to handle, and then that contributes to the parent not being as attentive as they should be. Now, long story short, that lack of consistent, stable environment leads to both ADHD and attachment issues. So it's not to be separated. For me, these symptoms are not to be looked at separately. It's about looking at what happened in your early childhood, understanding that, and changing that in your mind. And how do we do that? It starts with an awareness of where you are right now, of that rejection hypersensitivity that you may have, of overreacting, emotional hyperarousal. That's not something that you need to live with for the rest of your life. Now, I'm not saying you will completely disappear and you'll be the most normal and focused person. However, you can greatly diminish these unpleasant, for both yourself and your partner, symptoms if you do the healing work. So the first step is to become aware of what needs to change. The second step is to commit to the process, because it's not a one-off thing. It's not that you can have one therapy session and then you're fixed for life. It takes commitment to the process. And the third step is therapy, and that's why I call it ACT, Awareness Commitment Therapy. Now, when I say therapy, I do not mean talking therapy. I do not mean going to a psychologist every week for 10 years or 20 years and 25 years. That may be helpful actually for step one, which is the self-awareness bit. But once you have understood where you stand, once you have become aware of your own emotional responses or reactivity, then it's time for the true healing to take place. And true healing happens through deeper work, and a deeper work can happen in many ways. My favorite ways that I work in those ways as a therapist are hypnotherapy and emotional freedom technique and rapid transformational therapy. So those three approaches are what I work with in order to help my clients heal and change and completely transform ADHD symptoms as well as their relationships. So those are the three steps. Awareness is the first step. You need to become aware of how you respond to your partner and where your insecurities come up. You need to really, really become aware of them, and you need to not feel bad about them, but know that there is something to heal. Now, here's another thing that you can do if you have ADHD and have relationship issues as well. Research shows that a relationship would probably work or would tend to work if one of the partners has a secure attachment style. Now let's talk briefly about those attachment styles for a second. I deliberately left this for this part because it is relevant whether you have one or the other insecure attachment style. What is relevant is that you are taking responsibility upon yourself to do the work. So I don't want you to go hyper focused as you would with ADHD on what specifically you have. I want you to hyper focus on yourself, on every reaction and every moment, so that you can develop that self-awareness and you can and that willingness to do the work for yourself. But let's briefly review the attachment style. So the first one is the one we all aim to have, the secure attachment style, which, in children, that manifests as a child who is distressed when the caregiver leaves the room, usually the caregiver being usually the mother leaves the room. And when they come back, they are maybe still a little bit distressed, but they quickly bounce back. They quickly bounce back and they're happy to see her, and everything is well again. Insecure attachment style is the opposite of that. The child is, of course, still distressed when the parent leaves the room, but as they come back, they do one of two things. They're either actually one of three things. There are three styles identified. The anxious style. Let's start with the avoidance. The avoidance style is whether the child is completely detached. They don't even pay attention to the parent. In my case, my mother had to leave me for a little while with my grandparents for reasons that were not her fault whatsoever. And when she came back, I wouldn't even turn to her saying "mommy" and so on. Of course, she was distressed and so on. And because I had to detach from that pain of not being able to see her. So, and in my case, I overcame that. But in that kind of remain as the tendency to detach, because you never know what's going to happen. You're not sure that your relationships are going to last. That's when we learn to relate early on. How we relate to our parents, caregivers early on is how we learn to relate to people later in life. And it is said that these attachment styles can be impacted by our relationships later in life. They will either be reaffirmed or they'll be dismissed. However, we tend to exhibit that attachment style, particularly in time of stress. And we know with ADHD, we easily get stressed out, tired, and so on. Our executive function, our ability to filter things out will drop when we are hungry, tired, stressed out. And that's when the primary attachment style, which is usually an insecure attachment style, will come out. And let's say everything will be fine with your partner, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, you have this insecurity around the relationship. And you either start avoiding them or you start being anxious, you start show anxiety about the relationship. So what is it? Let's go to anxious attachment style now. The anxious attachment style is where a child will start being clingy. So a child, when the mother comes back to the room after having left, of course, the child will be distressed when she leaves. When she comes back, they'll start being clingy, insecure, always seeking that that attachment and always being afraid that the mother will leave again. So avoidant, just cuts off the caregiver altogether, says, I can't deal with this, it's too painful. And the anxious will start being clingy, and want to hold on to that relationship. Then we have a disorganized style, which is a mixture of both. And it's probably the worst the most rare one and the most difficult to understand when you grow up with such a style. And it's where you kind of have both. So one time you may be completely avoidant, rejecting your partner, or not wanting to be in a relationship altogether and avoiding relationships altogether, as was my case for many years, or you would be clingy within a relationship and always um, anxious that the person will leave you. And by the way, jealousy is also a sign of insecure attachment. Some jealousy, of course, can be normal and even healthy. However, extreme jealousy is nothing more than sign of insecurity, of that kind of early on trigger that you have developed, that person may leave. I'm not sure when that person is going to leave. In other words, I wasn't sure when my parent was going to leave or whether they're coming back. And you manifest that in your adult relationships as well. So that is one element of it. And once again, attachment style, you don't have to have ADHD to have attachment styles, and you don't necessarily have to have attachment issues, sorry. You don't necessarily have to have attachment issues if you have ADHD. Although, to be honest, I haven't met anyone yet with a completely secure attachment style and not showing any anxiety and or avoidance in their relationships, who also has ADHD. So some level of insecurity is most likely to be present within ADHD based on my experience. But just because you have issues in relationships doesn't mean that you have ADHD, or maybe you have some elements of it. Maybe you have lean towards the ADHD spectrum, but not quite there yet. Not quite there necessarily. So some broken attachment may have occurred in your childhood, but you're not quite there. Okay, so great news so far. So what do we do about it? Let's now talk more positively, and let's see what you can actually do about it. I already mentioned a couple of things, and I'll start with, again, the fact that having a secure partner, it will be more healing than anything else. That, in my experience and in my practice as well, in my observations, is the most healing force that you can ever have, more than any type of healing. Having someone that is completely secure and will reassure you when you feel distressed, when you have your tantrum of insecurity or jealousy or avoidance or whatever it may be, and they are there to hold the space for you, to contain your feelings, as potentially nobody has ever done for you. As children, our parents are meant to be that container for our feelings, and that's part of the lack of attachment and proper attachment attunement, that they were not there for us to contain our feelings. So we learned that our feelings either not important, or not relevant. We don't trust them anymore, and we suppressed our intuition. And having someone there for you who is able to do that would be the most healing force of all. So make sure that you are attracted and or date people with secure attachment style. Now, this is easily said than done, particularly before therapy. Everybody who says, "Oh, I'm always always drawn to these men who are unavailable, and I don't know why this always happens to me." It happens to you because you repeat the relationships that you observed early on. If your let's say father was unavailable early on, you will be drawn to male partners who exhibit the same qualities, because that's the type of relationship you expect from the opposite sex. If you have a mother who's overly overly protective of you. You may be drawn to that type of dominant women who are overly protective, and again, and kind of have that mother figure for you, represent that mother figure for you, and you are again reenacting those early on relationships. And that's the pattern you need to break. Now, you can either do that consciously and just decide that you're not going to do that anymore. You're not going to be drawn to people who are not either not available or to put you down or whatever your case may be. Or you can actually do the alternative, which I think is much easier, and it is to actually do the healing work. And as I mentioned, again, the healing work starts with awareness. Start being aware of your own responses, and also start being aware of the type of people you are being drawn to and who do they remind you of. In fact, think about your last 3 relationships, let's say, or if you've been avoiding relationships, maybe the last one relationship that you've been in. Think about the last relationship that you've been in, and think about everything you liked about that person and write it down. And then in another column, write down everything you did not like about that person, that drove you up the wall, that irritated you, that that made you feel bad about yourself, whether they were unavailable, distant, or rejecting, or whatever it may be for you. And then write it down in another column. And then look at column 1 and column 2 and ask yourself, who does that remind you of? Who do the attributes in column 1 remind you of? And who do the attributes in column 2 remind you of? Is there somebody you know? So think about the earlier on relationships you had in your life and think about who those, what you're reenacting right now in your life. And the minute you become aware of things, we say awareness is half the work done. The minute you start becoming aware of those things, you're already on your way to healing. Well done. You're already on your way to healing. Now, the next step is, as I said before, is to commit to that process. And then you actually do the therapy. Whether you do self-therapy, whether you actually work with a practitioner, to do that, you need to do the work. You need to go deep, understand deep within your psyche, within your awareness, and understand where every action or reaction come from, because nothing is ever by accident. We don't respond to something out of nowhere just because we have a gene that makes us be angry, or we have a gene that makes us be sensitive to rejection. There is no such gene. There is no such thing. What happens is you're born with a certain level of sensitivity, as I mentioned earlier, and then couple that with the environment you grow up in, where you felt constantly rejected by your primary caregiver or neglected, or maybe even trauma developed, maybe even severe trauma with abuse. You learn to distract yourself. You learn to dissociate from your feelings. You learn to detach from your feelings, and either become avoidant, or you learn to become clingy. You learn that you're not quite sure if that person is going to leave or not, so you better hold on to them. You're not quite sure what's happening in a relationship, so you better hold on to that relationship. You constantly check in on them, you constantly text them, and you become clingy and in the relationship. Now, the other thing that's worth noting is that as relationships evolve from dating to marriage, or to dating to a serious relationship to marriage to having children and so on, your expectations will also change, because what you observed what you observe within the family, maybe your expectations of how you raise children, for example, how to be within a marriage, what you the other relationships that you had may set the scene for what you expect in the dating phase. The relationships tend to rise and they tend to change over time as the relationship develops. So you may think, oh no, I've worked on this and I feel secure, and all of a sudden something else comes up. And that's okay. That's totally okay. That's why we have step two, which is the commitment to the process, because it's continuous work and it does get easier and easier as you take it upon yourself to heal, because it's not your fault what happened to you, but it's your responsibility to heal. Again, for the sake of yourself, for the sake of your children, the future generations. What's also very important with ADHD is you find someone who's understanding of what you're going through and accepting of what you're going through, of that distractibility, forgetfulness. It doesn't get constantly annoyed because you forgot your keys. You know, they need to accept who you are. That's not to say that it gets you off the hook to the healing work, but they need to be understanding. So understanding needs to happen from both sides. Okay. Another interesting phenomenon that I want to touch upon now today is that sometimes the worst of us will come up after the best moments with our partner in a relationship. So let's say, for example, you go out with your partner, you have a beautiful walk and a beautiful meal outside in the restaurant. You come home and everything is fine, um, and everything is just perfect, and you finally feel secure in that relationship. But there is still a part of you that feels insecure. And in that moment of utter security that our demons tend to come out. So the following morning, you may wake up and you suddenly think of, oh, why, who are you texting right now? And say things like, who texting right now? Or why didn't you take me to that trip I asked you for? Why didn't you do this thing for me that I asked you for the other day? So all of a sudden, some rupture develops. So some problem in a relationship develops. And you think, what on earth just happened? Especially if your partner has a secure attachment style, they may think, what on earth just happened? We just had a great time. You should feel secure. And instead you're having this, insecurity, this disruption in the relationship. And unfortunately, many people, especially people who do not have a secure attachment style, do not perceive that as insecurity from the other side. They perceive that as a personal attack. So if you're lucky enough to have a person with completely secure attachment, they may be able to hold that space for you. They may be able to say, okay, that is your insecurity and I'm here for you. I'm able to hold that space for you. I'm able to understand and maintain my composure. If, however, that they do not have a completely secure attachment style, and to me, attachment is a spectrum like any other. It's not like it was black and white. You're either secure or insecure. You can have completely secure style, or you can have some insecurities as well. So if the other person has their own triggers of rejection and so on, they may perceive your statement not as your own insecurity, but as an attack on themselves, and then it can snowball into conflict. So what happens in that case, then either of you can stop that snowball by actually taking a step back and looking into, okay, what just happened? What happened just now? Now, here's a trick. For someone with ADHD, it is very difficult to stop in the moment, because that self-regulation, that executive functioning, especially if we're tired, let's say you had a great night and you didn't sleep enough, or you had to rush for work, and all of a sudden you had this amazing evening, but then you were tired, and it's like all this stress is coming out. And it's coming out, actually research shows that when we finally do manage to feel secure and safe when we have ADHD, and then something stressful happens, it comes out so much more prominent than the way it happens in neurotypical or normal people, so to speak. So for you, that amount of stress coupled with the lack of emotional regulation or of prefrontal cortex regulation, it could come out as something way worse than you intended it to be, or that it's supposed to be. And so all of a sudden this horrible, kind of rupture happens. And it's difficult to stop in that moment until you are finished. So my take is actually that it is better to actually finish what you started in that moment. Of course, don't go to any extremes, but you have something to say, do say it, And then when you have calmed down, rather than stop yourself and block yourself in the moment, you develop this kind of tug of war with yourself. It is better to actually go all in. And then when you actually are able to rationalize it, you are actually able to do the repair, whether that takes a form of apologizing to a partner, whether it takes a form of self-awareness and looking for more healing and therapy, or both. When you have actually calmed the nervous system down, you are able to do the repair. It's not about the rupture, it's always about the repair. We tend to, again, ADHD thing, we have elevated levels of cortisol, and we also perceive things in the moment, and when they feel bad in the moment, so it's the end of the world, and it's never going to be good again, and it's never going to be, it's the end of the relationship, or it's the end of, this is really, really bad. It is usually not the case. More often than not, it's not the case. Most things are repairable. You're able to take a step back, explain to yourself first, and then also communicate effectively. So just remember that it may seem like the end of the world in the moment, but it doesn't mean that it is, and usually it's not. So once you calm down, then you can actually do the repair. Most people will tell you, but it's not to say anything and walk away. The thing is, I believe that if you have ADHD, there's so much going on here, especially before you've done the healing work. Walking away and repressing things once again, which is what you have done your whole life, is not necessarily the best option. Again, if you're lucky enough to have someone understand your feelings, what you're going through, they would not, when if you start, shouting or, whatever happens in the rupture, they may be able to hold that space for you. If not, again, it's about having an outlet for your feelings. And if you think that it would be too much to do within the conversation, of course you can walk away and have a different outlet, but just making sure you do the repair afterwards. And again, it comes down to self-awareness, and it comes down to not succumbing to our diagnosis and thinking, oh, I have ADHD and I'm this and that and that and that and that, and therefore it can never be fixed. No, we are, people with ADHD tend to be even more intelligent than most of us. What we struggle with is emotional regulation. But in terms of IQ, actually it shows that it's not lower, even higher than the average individual, the neurotypical people, so to say. But what we do struggle with is emotional regulation. And trying to do that emotional regulation in the moment may be too much. What you can do is take a step back and repair the situation later on. And if you have that understanding and willingness to repair things from both sides, then it will work. But again, it takes that willingness from both sides to work. It's relationships, unfortunately, a two-way street. You cannot just take it upon yourself to do all the work. You need to have that understanding. You need to have that acceptance, and vice versa. You need to give that acceptance, because remember that just like you feel different and you don't understand what neurotypical people do, they don't understand why you do what you do. So they feel just as odd about your behaviors like you do about normal neurotypical things. So you rightfully will expect their acceptance and understanding, but you ought to give it to them as well, to the other person as well, to your, let's assume, neurotypical partner. You need to give them that understanding and acceptance as well, and be willing to communicate and explain what happens in the moment, give them context for your behavior, but also be willing on the things, be working on the things that can be worked on. So again, ADHD in love and relationships isn't so much different from working on any other relationship issues, even if you do not necessarily have ADHD. It's just that in the moment, it may be more difficult to control yourself. So I wouldn't advise to try and control yourself in the moment. It may be too hard. And also, but make sure to repair the relationship after. And also, just be aware of the fact that things will often seem worse than they actually are. We perceive things in the moment. We cannot really foresee the future and think that things will get better because it's what we experienced growing up. This kind of constant, our happiness being taken away. This will very often comes up as well. My clients, everything's fine, and all of a sudden, poof, your happiness gets snatched away just like this because the grown-ups have decided to do something, or have taken you out of your state of happiness, and you hold on to that happiness, and you feel that it's taken away once, it will never come back. But you remember that you're in control now, and remember that being in a healthy relationship is the biggest healing of all, the biggest healing force of all. We say that the greatest love of all is the one you give to yourself, but the biggest healing force for you as someone with ADHD and attachment issues is that unconditional love and support you get from the other person, unconditional love and support and understanding you get from the other person. And so that you can start giving that to yourself too.